How does one awaken to the truth? How does one wake up to realize what's behind the curtains? Very often termed, and it's become part of the mainstream and trends. People want to be woke. Where does this come from? What does it take to make someone wake up? Imagine you are in a place landlocked where the nearest coast is many miles away. In this place, your main method of maneuvering around is of course by foot. So, as soon as you learn to walk, this becomes your main mode of transportation, and you move around. Later on, you improve your mode of transportation on land as you discover a horse. And so you use the horse to ride around the area. This way you can maneuver around much more quickly, and so you can discover things much more quickly within the vicinity you decide to explore. Now there's an ocean out there, and so as you're exploring, you come across the coast, and you're in awe to witnessing the ocean for the first time. This could resemble the awakening, but okay, you've woken up now, so what? You've realized that there's much more to explore now. Or do you just want to settle as being termed woke? Now, when seeing the vast ocean for the first time, you were invited to explore the ocean. Now, you've explored different modes of transportation on land, but now you're going to have to explore a different mode of transportation on the ocean. And so you discover there are boats. Now, many people at this point tend to say, you know what, I'm happy exploring on land. I'm comfortable doing this. I'd rather not explore the ocean. From where I stand, I can see that it's vast and beautiful, but there is nothing else to really see. Other people, they ponder what is beyond the ocean. Now, for those who decide to take on sailing lessons and they take on this absolutely new mode of transportation, which isn't on land anymore, but on sea. They sail, and they realize that this vast ocean, there isn't very much to see from what I began to see from the coast. Now, it sounds crazy, but the next thought that comes along is, what's in the depths of this ocean? And so diving into the ocean, you have discovered a completely new dimension of exploration. Because at first inland, you are exploring and maneuvering around in the two-dimensional plane. Now there's a third dimension. You are diving into the ocean. and now you're discovering a completely different world. Now notice how this requires a completely different vehicle. Now, upgrading the vehicles on land from foot to a horse to a car maybe, this basically is an analogy for you sharpening your intellect. Sharpening your intellect allows you to explore concepts much more fluidly, much more efficiently. But transitioning from exploring on land to exploring on sea is you not using your intellect as much anymore, but it's sort of using the clear perception more, becoming more aware of the situation from a non-personal perspective. The only way one can use the intellect with its sharpness, is if there's a person holding that sharp knife to slice through the concepts, to cut them in half in order to see what they consist of. Sailing by boat is a completely different mode of exploration. Now, to dive into this ocean means to learn to swim. And so very oftentimes when you are piercing through these more subtle dimensions of exploration within yourself, what tends to happen is that you can sometimes just blank out. You can have a trail of discovery, and then all of a sudden your mind goes blank. This is you sort of drowning, let's just say. It's not as severe as it sounds, but essentially the drowning is you blanking out. And so what happens is you are required to hone your skill in swimming, much like you've honed your skill in walking. Because if you don't walk very well on land, when you come across a problem that needs a sharp intellect to be solved, you can get stuck on this problem for a while, and that's you falling over as you walk instead. So, this is explaining how there's sort of another way of exploring, rather than the only way of exploring, which is using the intellect backed up by memory. Now, to understand further what it means to wake up is to use no analogy better than sleeping, because it involves waking up, of course. But let's imagine that you are in deep sleep and you are dreaming. You were in a dream world, and all of a sudden there's a lion. The lion bites you and you wake up. Now the same transition of you coming out of the dream world within the sleep state to you waking up in this waking state, there is another transition that can take place from this waking state to a completely new waking state. Many people and many Western teachings, they refer to this state as the dream state. Hindu philosophy refers to it as Maya, the illusion. So, how do you know you are approaching an awakening? Now, I don't want this to be one of those top 10 ways to find out you are becoming enlightened, or tips and tricks on how to a shortcut towards enlightenment or whatever. No. Any food for thought here is an invitation to drop the reliance on using the thought. The very main motivation of this podcast, or the walks and the talks, is to show you that there is a universal podcast that one can tune into. Now, imagine having a conversation with someone about the more superficial aspects of life. What you did yesterday, what you're going to do tomorrow, the weather, the small talk type of stuff. Now, many people engage their lives mostly in this field of contemplation, let's call it. But some people like to break out of this field of contemplation and go further into the distance. These people enter fields of wonder. What is beyond just these platonic conversations? What is there beyond life? What happens after death? What is the truth of life? The very philosophical questions. Now, this kind of inquiry puts you in a slightly more different state. So imagine talking about what you're going to eat next. Compare it to talking about the planetary system, the solar system. The solar system where the sun is its center, and that in this galaxy there are around 200 billion stars, just like the sun, varying in sizes. 200 billion stars just in this one galaxy, out of 100 billion observable galaxies. Note, observable. And the planet is just there, gushing at a tremendous speed through space. Just like that. A ball of mud. Now, what this does, it kind of lifts away any sense of importance surrounding the personhood or the ego. What is the concepts being observed here is not being observed from that much of a personal perspective as much. And so it's in that direction that leads you to waking up. So the vehicle or the fuel for you to open the curtains to see what is behind the curtains is wonder. Are you intrigued? Are you yearning to know more about life from a conscious perspective rather than a more intellectual, memory-based perspective? So what happens when you keep going in this direction? the direction of duality to non-duality, the directions of the infinite amount of spectrums of different poles into transcending all of them. One comes closer to the oneness of existence, to the seed of the tree that has branched off into many branches, making place for many different leaves. At this point, it's also worth emphasizing the tremendous capabilities contemplation offers. The difference in this case between thinking normally and contemplating is that thinking surrounds one plane of events. Thinking is more based on solving a problem. Contemplating is like thinking, but it is using more the awareness, and it is done more by looking far into the distance and contemplating. It isn't so much about solving a problem, but it's more about solving a mystery. Here you are sort of invited to solve the mystery, but it's not really a must. You can kind of shrug off solving the mystery and live your life and get on. And this makes it an honor to be contemplative. Contemplation then puts you into a meditative state. The meditative state is the vehicle that allows you to maneuver within the mystery. This vehicle is then fueled by wonder. So what does contemplation do? Contemplation allows you to realize from a non-personal perspective the hard-coded and rigidly placed spectrums of the different poles within one person. So to put this in different terms, contemplation allows you to see that there are two ways at looking at life. This far, there is a bad way and there's a good way. There is a like and there's a dislike. There is light and there is darkness. There is black and white. There is hot and cold. There are opposites. Now, light and darkness. Light can only be there and is only observable to be there because there is darkness. And darkness is observable or known to be there because of light. So one can't be without the other. And so since one implies the other, both poles of the spectrum are one. It is one element. So, life is constantly presenting itself with many events, many scenarios. This can be observed, but at the same time, the intellect can say this is a good event and this is a bad event. And so now there is a spectrum in which we place these events. Now, as soon as there's a spectrum, there is the ability to lean and tend towards one end of the spectrum. And so therefore, balancing on a very thin rope can make you fall. And this falling is the suffering that has arisen from the vision and the immersion of duality. And so contemplation allows you to understand that embracing the bad the same way the so-called good, and these are in parentheses, by embracing the bad as well as the good, will allow an individual to transcend the very spectrum that the person has created over time. Transcending the spectrum means that you are no more bound and a victim to whatever lies on that spectrum. And since you don't feel in according to the outcome of the spectrum, what do you feel now? There is no option but to feel peace. You are in a place of euphoria. You are at bliss. And so contemplation allows you to look at many of these developed spectrums within ourselves. And by placing the emphasis of the contemplation on these spectrums, do we overcome them. The acceptance due to the contemplation leads to the understanding that allows us to overcome them. We now transcend the spectrum. We are no more bound by its outcomes and its poles. We are now at bliss. So contemplation always tends to invite an individual to unite that which has been split. The intellect always invites the individual to cut that which is whole. Now, neither vehicles are bad. They are required, of course, for maneuvering within the given terrain. But of course, if you have an apple, or if you have an animal such as a bird, the intellect invites you to understand this bird, and so its means is to cut the bird in half. Now, of course, you understand how the bird works on the inside, but the bird is now dead. Contemplation allows you to become one with the bird. You become the bird, and so you see what it's like to be the bird from the bird's perspective. Now, when enough spectrums have been transcended, you kind of become quite good at sailing on the ocean. And so you become lifted way above the spectrums. You are free from the outcomes of the spectrums. Now, people that come to this stage are often faced with an experience that they are not used to. Things become very bland. What used to be a roller coaster of a life is now pretty flat. But this is temporary. Just like the aeroplane that starts to ascend after it takes off, starts to see more and more of the place where it has taken off from. It starts to increase its field of vision as it continues to take off. But eventually there comes a layer of clouds, and so within the period of time in which the plane is in the layer of clouds, you cease to see anything at all. And this is where faith comes in. Trust the ascendance. Trust the process. Trust life. Trust that this existence will do what it needs to do. What needs to happen will happen. And so surrender to it. Accept it all, whichever way it wants to go. Accept it. Because whether you like it or not, it will eventually have to be faced. So, face it with arms wide open. Accept it all. Only then will you realize that whatever you were trying to avoid from accepting was so overrated. It wasn't that bad. And eventually the plane ascends above that patch of clouds. And so the field of view becomes tremendous. It starts to see what is below, but also above, into the stars. Thank you for walking along. For those of you tuning in to the podcasts on iTunes and Spotify and the rest of the other platforms, if you like to see a simulated walk, there are videos uploaded on YouTube alongside these podcasts. And those of you, of course, who are on YouTube, who would rather listen to the podcasts, they are also available. And per usual, if you walk with someone, it's a two-way conversation. So I'd like to hear from you. If you have a suggestion of what you'd like me to talk about next, please mention it. It's very much appreciated. If you have any suggestions on how your experience of listening to this podcast or walk can be improved, also please mention it. Otherwise, see you on the next walk.